Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Today, I'll be chatting with Sarah and Nate Walsh. They are the husband and wife team behind Walsh Family Wines in Virginia. Along with working for the family winery, Sarah also manages the Northern Virginia sales for Winebow, a wine importer and distributor. Sarah is a Georgia native who settled in Virginia after working in the hospitality industries of Atlanta and Chicago, and began her career in wine distribution 11 years ago. She has a WSET diploma and is very passionate about building connections between farmers, wineries, restaurants, breweries, and creatives. Nate is an English major turned winemaker. He's worked at wineries in Oregon and New Zealand, but is proud to be farming grapes now in Virginia. Now, before we get into it, I want to give you a quick reminder. If you are not on my mailing list yet, I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll be getting a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips and recommendations, special offers, and so much more. And of course, be sure to check out my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. We get together every month to try new wines and learn from others in the wine world. Head to my website, corkandfizz.com/thecorkcrew, and use code WINE101 when you sign up to get your first month free. Now, without further ado, let's get into the interview. Okay, well, thanks guys for coming on the podcast. Really excited to have you here and get to learn more about Virginia wine. I reached out to Diana at Sipping Virginia, and you guys were top of the list for places she recommended to learn about Virginia wine.
We adore her. She does such a great job curating a great fan base of Virginia wine drinkers. So
right? Doesn't she? I had no idea about Virginia wine before I found her on Instagram, and then I was like hooked on it as soon as she talked about it.
She spreads the gospel very well.
Yes, she does. So yeah, why don't we'll just get started kind of right away. I always like to share. I do a little intro for you, but I think it's better that you guys, tell your story better than I do. So can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
So you have Sarah and Nate Walsh here. I am Nate Walsh. So my background is in wine production and vineyard management. So I started working in wineries in 2004 in Virginia and got the bug through the production end of things. Really kind of fell in love with just the hands-on sort of in the vineyard or in the cellar end of it. I left Virginia for a while and worked a little bit on the West Coast and overseas. But the more I learned about wine and kind of got exposed to the whole industry, I always wanted to end up. There was a big part of Virginia that's always appealed to me because there's still a lot to establish and there's still so much to learn. And I found that to be really exciting. And I think I secretly like being the underdog. And so I came back in 2008 and ended up in the northern part of Virginia, which is when we met.
We come from kind of different sides of the beverage industry. So my background is in hospitality. I worked in restaurants since I was 14, grew up in Georgia. So that kind of took me to Savannah and then Atlanta. Then I moved to Chicago and worked in some really great restaurants there. And I moved to Virginia actually to work on a farm and milked cows and made cheese for a little while, drove a tractor. And through that experience, through a friend who ran the cheese counter at a really incredible wine and cheese shop, I got into the wine industry. And it became a really great cross-section of my hospitality background and also an interest in farming. So it kind of seemed like the perfect fit. I started working for a really amazing wine importer based out of Richmond, Virginia, like 13 years ago now. And I did sales for them for a really long time. And then just after COVID, I moved into a managerial position. And now I run the sales team up here in Northern Virginia. So it's been great. It's been, a little journey.
It feels like it's a little bit of everything. Like you said, you guys each kind of came from different areas and then brought different things to it. I have to ask, what you started in hospitality, what brought you to a farm?
It was right when the farm to table movement was kind of starting in food. And I found that really intriguing. Just kind of to learn.
I love it. Okay. And then I'm curious, so it's kind of like the story of, where you got started. What encouraged you? Did you know you always wanted to start your own winery? Or was there something that kind of happened that you're like, we should just do this ourselves. I don't want to work for somebody else. I want to have my own winery that we share Virginia wine.
So no, we never. So, we met through wine and got married. And despite the fact that we kind of have very complementary backgrounds for starting a business that is like winemaking and hospitality, we did not really ever talk about it. And it wasn't until, for the most part, I've always been pretty involved in like the regional or statewide associations for viticulture or like the wineries associations. And because of that, I often get requests to come look at a piece of property where somebody thinks this is where we're going to go grow the great East Coast Nebbiolo, and they want to come look at, or they want somebody to look at it. And I really enjoy the sort of site, the uniqueness of site end of it. So I like to go do that. I find it to be kind of fun and interesting. So that's what happened. We had a gentleman reached out. His family had bought a piece of property that already had a vineyard on it, small vineyard, a 4-acre vineyard. And they just kind of wanted to understand what they could do with it. They didn't want to be in the wine industry or anything, but they knew that it was probably valuable. So I went and looked at the vineyard and called Sarah after talking to the order that this happened is I went and looked at the vineyard and I said, hey, the winery that I work for right now, this is a phenomenal vineyard. The winery that I work for right now is not really interested in taking on a 4-acre vineyard. That's sort of too small for what we're doing, but I would do it. And he said,
and by I, he meant we.
Yeah.
Right. He was speaking for both of you.
Yeah. And the owner said, what do you mean you would do it? You don't have a winery. And I said, well, this is how we would start a winery based on this vineyard. So then I called Sarah and said, hey, I may have just signed a lease.
We may have just started a business.
And that's how we started. So it was just, I was so blown away by this vineyard, and I really enjoy, and like the wines that are very important to me are very vineyard, like focused on a place and kind of a celebration of what can make that place unique. And I was standing in this vineyard and I was like, this is just the best site I've seen in Northern Virginia. We've got to do it. Like we could do something really special from here. So that's how we started. It's
a really spectacular vineyard.
Yeah,
site.
It was not planned out. It was not like we started with a business plan.
Right.
Which some people would agree with, seeing how we run it.
I mean, the world of wine, it's the land where, like, yeah, you got to take the opportunity when it's there, right? It's you could have started with all that, but you started with the best thing, the vineyard. I love it. So I do want to chat a little bit about, for some listeners, this may be the first time they're hearing about winemaking in Virginia. So I definitely don't think it'll be their last now. Can you tell us a bit more about Virginia wine country and why it's a great place to grow wine? Or wine grapes, I should say. Make the wine.
It's a really diverse state. There's a wide kind of swath of geographical features throughout the state of Virginia. You have the ocean and the coast, and you have the Appalachian Mountains that run right through. And you have, for a place that is relatively wet, for grape growing, right? Our climate type here is not too dissimilar from the climate in Bordeaux. It's a little bit cool, a little bit maritime. We get some humidity, we get some heat, but we have this mountain range that runs all the way through that really gives you the opportunity for elevation and for water evacuation and for the breeze. And what we have found is that when you get up off of kind of just like in most regions, when you get up off the floor and you get up on these hillsides and mountainside sites, the potential for what can be grown there is really incredible and really, really super interesting. And so we see people farming all along the Appalachian Trail and outside of that as well. There's some coastal vineyard sites, and the Shenandoah Valley is an incredible place to farm. Yeah, I would say my answer would be the diversity. What would your answer be?
So I would say
Nate's really the
depending on
farming
who
side,
your listenership is or where they are, I would not be surprised at all if they had not ever had a Virginia wine or knew much about it. There are probably about 350 wineries, and acreage wise, so the industry started in really like the 70s. So we were later to start after Prohibition than the entire West Coast. And it has grown fairly steadily since then. There's about 5,000 acres planted, which is not much at all. That is teeny. And because of the topography, it is very unlikely that you can find sites of a 500-acre site or a 300-acre site just because of the topography. It's very, as Sarah said, the really great places to grow are generally on these hills, and just the way the land works here. The sites are small.
There's not a great place for huge commercial.
Yeah.
Right.
And the industry has grown. There's been a consistently strong growth of wine sales within Virginia, where basically Virginians are kind of drinking the wine, and the average winery size, this is a generalization, is probably like 3,000 cases. So teeny. So one positive of that is you get these really interesting small batch things, very site specific. You get these different projects that are really interesting and fun. The negative is there's very little wine that's made that like leaves the state in a wholesale capacity, which means the word doesn't really get out there. So the best Virginia wines are really probably not even accessible like in other markets.
Well,
or you could buy them from the wineries.
Direct to consumer.
Right.
Direct to consumer.
I think personally, it's just my opinion, that the growth of Virginia wine is probably not through wholesale. As someone who works through wholesale, I think there's a lot of room to grow wholesale Virginia wine business, but I think our strength will be selling direct to consumer. People who come out or hear about it, who are interested, who reach out to the wineries, and then we can ship wine directly to them.
Yeah. And then, as Sarah mentioned, Virginia, it's hard to give a stereotype for like, well, what kind of wine is Virginia wine? Because Virginia is big and it's very diverse. Like it's got the mountains, we've got the foothills, the valley, and then the coast. So in general, Virginia, because of the kind of, we have a great amount of heat and we have a good length of season. Mm-hmm. And we have cold enough winters where primarily it's vinifera, but there is a good amount of hybrids done in Virginia. And it tends to be within the reds, Bordeaux focused. The kind of uniqueness is we really like Cabernet Franc. We lean much more heavily on Cabernet Franc than we do Cab Sauv or Merlot. We lean probably more heavily on Petit Verdot than any other region in the world. There's a lot of varietal Petit Verdots. It's a very interesting grape here.
Mm-hmm. Tannat too.
And then we do Tannat. So like from the Mataran or from Uruguay now. Tannat really does well here. And then within the white grapes, the kind of most unique has been Viognier for us. So the Rhone white from Condrieu. Mm-hmm. It ripens quite well here. And there's a big growing interest in Petit Manseng.
Yes, where is that from? That is a Vitis vinifera, like a European grape. It's not a hybrid. I haven't heard of that one as much, but I see it in Virginia.
Yeah, it's mostly Southern French. Is the classical home for Petit Manseng. You don't see it a lot outside.
Well, it's also it's not varietally bottled there because they blend it with Gros Manseng and a couple other ones.
But yeah, no, you don't really see it anywhere, do you? Other than Virginia, which I see it as like a single varietal a lot.
And it's
delicious.
It is. It's very high acid, so it's a real zingy It has a really great like textural depth, and it has kind of the same versatility as like a Chenin from the Loire, where sometimes you can go off dry, so you can go dry with, and it kind of depends on the vintage.
Do a
You can do a
sparkling.
sparkling, yeah.
That's
We love Petit
cool.
Manseng.
Yeah.
We think it's a great wine for the state.
So that's sort of the broad overview I would give of it.
Yeah, that's a great overview.
The main regions, I guess I would say, are so we're up in Northern Virginia, and that's where the Blue Ridge Mountains kind of come up. And then there's a secondary ridge called the Catoctin Ridge, which is where our vineyards are. There's a big industry in Northern Virginia. There's a big industry in the Central Virginia, which is the Monticello AVA, so the Charlottesville area. And then the Shenandoah Valley is probably the most rapidly growing, the whole valley, which is just you're getting vineyards up on in good elevations, so we're getting really nice acidity and sort of factors that mitigate the humidity that can be difficult. So those are the main areas, although there's stuff is grown
all over,
but those are the three main, or in my opinion, the main areas that we have.
And I think to kind of zoom people in a little bit, where Nate and I are, we are an hour from DC proper. We are 30 minutes from the Washington, D.C. airport, which is in Virginia, from Dulles Airport. So it's an area where, even though we're out in wine country, we're still quite accessible. Right. And a lot of our tourism traffic comes from the city, which is really fun.
Nice. No, I love that. Especially, yeah, anywhere close. Because when you think of like Washington, in order to like, most people, like, I guess I think of like the big metropolitan area, Seattle. And so to get out to the wine country, you at least have to typically cross over the mountains and get over there. And then even like some of the top regions like Walla Walla, I mean, that's like a 5-hour drive from Seattle. So the benefit of being close to a city, I think that definitely helps with growth and, you know, encouraging people out. So you mentioned quite a few grapes, but I'm curious if you, like, your personal opinion, like when I think of like, there are like certain regions where like a grape just stands out as like the grape that place will be known for, essentially. Like winemakers might think that other grapes do better, but it's like that's what's known, where like, you know, Oregon is Pinot Noir, like that's what comes to mind, and California is Cabernet for the most part. Is there one wine that you think like Virginia over time, like that will just stand out and be like the known for grape of Virginia?
I don't know if that will happen, but I personally hope that it's Cabernet Franc.
I love it.
If I can manifest what it will be, it would be Cabernet Franc. I love Cabernet Franc, and I think that it's interesting enough that people will be looking for it and asking about it, but not so esoteric that people are afraid of it. I think that maybe as we were speaking of before, Petit Manseng, I think is very interesting and a great for us to be growing moving into the future. But as someone who sells wine and works with just the end consumer a lot, I would be nervous to hang, you know, too much on one specific grape, because it is more esoteric and people aren't as familiar with it yet. But I think really what's even more exciting to me than kind of hanging our hat on one grape is there's so much kind of fun, young experimentation happening in the Virginia wine industry. So as Nate was mentioning earlier, there's hybrid grapes, there's, you know, cider grape blends. There's a lot of really fun projects that are starting here because there really aren't any rules yet. And it's an industry that's very collaborative and very supportive. So if you have an idea of any sort of wine that you could make or grape that you could grow or thing you want to do, the odds are high that you could make 3 phone calls and someone will help you do it. So I think that personally is very exciting.
Yeah, I think that's the benefit, right, of like a new region where like you don't have something that you're known for, so you don't have to worry. You know, I remember I was in Napa Valley in California and we had a Chenin Blanc, my husband and I, out there, and I was like, why is this not grown more? It's delicious, it's amazing. And they're like, well, we can't get the money for it. We can get money, you know, Cabernet Sauvignon, you can get the money for it, people know. And that's what people then end up leaning towards, because, you know, they also have to make money to have a living. Whereas like, yeah, having like a newer region, you kind of get to experiment a little bit more and lean into that.
Yeah, it's a very, very fun place to be in the wine industry right now, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about like grapes, but you also mentioned this idea of like sense of place, which I've always called like in the French term terroir, of like this idea that like the place where you grow the grapes has potentially the most influence on the grapes rather than the variety itself. Can you talk a little bit more about how that plays a part in your winemaking, especially for those that are kind of new to this idea? I think in the US, we tend to think of things as like the grape variety, right? It's Chardonnay. So then all Chardonnay is going to be the same, but that's not true. There's this idea of that terroir and sense of place.
Yeah. I work with an importer whose name is Eric Solomon. He has an import company called European Cellars, and his tagline is place over process. And that's always been really special to me. And I think when Nate and I talked originally about starting to make wine under our own label, and, when we started Walsh Family Wine, it was just, a tiny amount of wine. And when you're doing something on that scale, you can really dial in what you want it to be. And we just had this one vineyard site that we really thought was incredibly special. And as you were saying, the French idea of terroir is that nothing that we grow at Bethany Ridge, which is our main vineyard site, would taste the same if it was grown somewhere else. And Nate and I have had a lot of long conversations about how so much of the magic of in wine and about wine is kind of along those lines, that when you have these really great places in the world, and what you can coax out of those sites just by farming them, as gently as you possibly can, and then making wine as gently and easily as you possibly can, hopefully over the next decades, 50, 60 years, what you slowly see in the wines that we make is what that specific area of the world, how it expresses itself in a wine. And we've kind of extrapolated that now because we have 6 vineyard sites. So we are doing that not just with one place now, but with 6 places. But I think for us, the really deep dive into that is we farm those sites ourselves. So we aren't buying fruit from other wineries. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because we also sell fruit to a lot of wineries, and we know those products are as equally as important. But I think for us, a big focus of our project is seeing how these little parts of the world express themselves in a wine.
Yeah. I mean, you can't like start your winery with the most amazing vineyard and then, not farm the grapes yourself, right? Like that's that's the crux of your guys' whole shebang. It's fun. So you talked about you have different vineyards. So I'm curious if you've started, like you said, you've kind of started to kind of figure this out a little bit. Are there certain things that stand out from each vineyard that you would say is what makes that vineyard special, or something that like, to kind of explain a little bit more of, does one winery end up making wines that are more aromatic? Does one have, reds with more tannin? Is there anything that you've started to notice out of these out of these vineyards?
Yeah, absolutely. So we bottle pretty much every wine we make is a vineyard designate wine, and we label them that way. So it's all labeled by the vineyard, just like so many other wineries that do it in a similar way. And so in any given year, we might bottle. So Cabernet Franc, for example, we could bottle probably 4 Cabernet Francs if we did Cabernet Franc from each vineyard that has it, or we do sometimes 2 Sauv Blancs. We could do multiple Petit Mansangs. We have a lot of varieties that we can and do bottle multiple bottlings of to show people and ourselves like what we think is really interesting about these differences. So to answer your question, like an example, the first wine that we made from the Bethany Ridge Vineyard was Sauvignon Blanc. And that was the only wine we made for 3 years because we couldn't afford to make any other wines. And you didn't have to buy barrels.
True.
The Bethany Ridge Sauvignon Blanc is a very consistent, maybe our flagship wine in the grand scheme of things. But we also have a vineyard called Twin Notch, which is a little bit of a younger vineyard. And there's a Twin Notch Sauvignon Blanc too. So we do these vineyard designate Sauv Blancs. And they're actually, these 2 vineyards are both on the same ridge. And as the crow flies, they're about a half a mile from each other.
I was going to say less than a mile.
Maybe less. Yeah. And the soil is not exactly the same. So there's a little bit of a variation in the soil. And then the aspect is a little different. So the way that the slope is facing is slightly different. And we see differences in the vigor of the vines. We see differences in kind of the way the vines react to the location. But in the end, it's, well, what's, the proof is in the pudding. What's the difference in the final product? So we still, every year, we make the wines very intentionally. We are not allowed to do anything different in the cellar to either wine.
They're made exactly
the same way.
Okay.
So whatever we're going to do for one, we will and are about to start changing it to kind of try to emphasize the vineyard kind of idiosyncrasies of the vineyard, but we haven't started doing that yet. And each year they're different in a very consistent way. So we have Bethany Ridge, which is on very shallow soils, very rocky soils, and kind of heavy granite based. There's a type of like decomposed granite in our area that's called greenstone that we really like. It's like a flaky kind of granite. And the Bethany Ridge Sauvignon Blanc is very textural. It has a lot of length. It's riper. It's in terms of ripeness, I often think it's more like it can be ripe like some areas of the West Coast. Certainly not like what people would expect from like, a New Zealand Sauv Blanc or...
It doesn't have that super green
Yeah, it's
quality.
very ripe. Great length. And then the Twin Notch Sauv Blanc, it has much more pronounced acidity. It tends to be a little more closed and more sort of fruit focused and sort of zingier is the way that I would describe it.
It's quite zippy.
Yeah, it's very zippy. It's sort of more of a refreshing Sauv Blanc. And we've seen these very consistent differences year to year. And
we actually release them at the same time.
Yeah, we release them the same day.
And make people taste them side by side.
And so that's kind of to answer your question, like these differences that we see now, we have reasons of why we think we see those differences based on how they ripen and how the vineyards act and the age of the vines. And there's a level of it that I wouldn't pretend to understand, but we kind of like to celebrate that and to show other people this is, and we didn't make this up, the monks have started thousands of years ago, but we just find it really fascinating and interesting. And it's by no means, are we unique in that we're doing this in the world, but it's something that, at least speaking for myself, we just think it's very fun and interesting. And it's always been our focus is these vineyard specific wines.
Oh, I think it's so cool. So cool. I feel like that's one of those things that to me that like, when I fell in love with wine, that's one of those reasons where, like you said, like, it's like we make them the exact same way. They're really only grown on vineyards half a mile apart, if that. And like, there's all these things that tell you that they should end up being like very, very similar wines. And then every year you get like this specific difference to them. And like you said, you're like, well, there are some things that we could point to that we're like, okay, yeah. But then there's also just, again, there's that terroir and sense of place, and you just have to like accept it that that is what's doing it. And some of it doesn't have to be explained for you to just enjoy it.
Yeah. And I think part of it too, that I really like, there are not a lot of things, at least in the US, that really celebrate like a place. Like we're very globalized and there's lots of great benefits to that. But food and wine can still be one of those things. And I think for me, it's very important. Like it's very meaningful to me to do things that let's celebrate this farm and what's unique about right here, because we don't have a lot of that. And for that reason too, we've tried to kind of be successful at it. We also like to promote these farms. We don't own most of these vineyards that we farm. We have like these long-term leases with landowners, and we want to promote their farms and farming in general and like the use of land in that way.
Definitely. It's a good reminder that like, good wine comes from good farming, right? And we have to appreciate the farm aspect as well with the winemaking. So do you ever feel like you're stuck in a rut, doing the same old thing day in and day out? You wake up, go to work, come home, go to bed, and repeat. When life gets busy, it can be easy to fall into that routine and forget how important it is to prioritize joy and fun. But what if I told you there was a way to break out of that cycle? A way to bring more excitement and adventure into your life. And it involves one of the most wonderful things in the world, wine. Introducing my Cork Crew Virtual Tasting Club. This is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. Each month, we'll select 2 styles of wine to focus on. We'll taste them together virtually, all while learning more about the regions that the wines are from and the grapes that make the wine. You'll also have the opportunity to meet winemakers, sommeliers, and other wine professionals through our monthly community events. But it's not just about the wine. It's about breaking out of your routine, trying new things, and having a little fun. Imagine being able to impress your friends at your next dinner party with your newfound wine knowledge. Feeling confident when you walk into a wine shop, knowing exactly what to look for and what you'll enjoy. Imagine adding a little bit of excitement to your everyday life. So why not do something for you? Come join the Cork Crew Virtual Tasting Club and start exploring the endless sea of discovery and joy that is the world of wine. Sign up at my website, corkandfizz.com/thecorkcrew, and don't forget to use code WINE101 to get your first month free. And now, back to the show. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit more of a difficult question. I feel like whenever I bring this up, but it's a good one because I want you to showcase your wines. But so for somebody listening, I know you guys ship to most areas in the US, just direct. So if somebody's listening and they want to try some Virginia wine for the first time, they're going to head to your website. Which wines, let's say like 3 bottles you'd give them to start out, which wines would you recommend they try to get a feel for Walsh Family Wines along with like Virginia wine?
I would recommend Viognier, and we should both give our answers, but if folks are not familiar with Viognier, it's this very aromatic, almost Gewürztraminer-esque style of white wine. So very peach, very apricot, very floral. It's not a super high acid white wine, so it's super easy to drink. But there aren't a lot of other wines or grapes in the world that taste or smell like Viognier. It's so distinct. And I don't know, it's just one of my favorite things that we do. And I think you, Nate, and the team here make a really incredible expression of Viognier. It can get kind of waxy and heavy in the way that kind of Chardonnay can get oaky and heavy. Viognier can veer into that world, but I think the style that we make at Walsh is really bright and clean, and you get all of those distinctive flavors and aromatics, but it's not cloying and heavy. So it's just like my favorite.
I'm also a big fan of Viognier, so
okay, great. It can be a little polarizing, but I personally love it. I would also say rosé, which maybe everyone's over rosé, but it's one of the best-selling wines in our winery. Nate and I joke that if you come to the tasting room on the weekends, on like a busy Saturday, there's people hanging around. They're on the patio. You can kind of walk out into the vineyard here, and when you look around and you see what people are drinking and what people are walking out the door with, you might actually think that rosé is the only wine we make. Like, it's just so popular. And again, it's just an easy foot in the door. The price point is easy, and we make a dry style rosé. We actually make a dry style still rosé and pet nat rosé, which is also quite delicious. Although I don't know if it's available for shipping. It is great. Yeah. So either of those, and then I'm torn on the reds, but I would probably say Cabernet Franc, the Bethany Ridge Cabernet Franc. Again, because it's delicious and it's so good.
Well, that's great for Virginia. Yeah. I mean, my answers would be similar. So Cabernet Franc is so consistent. And it's not really like a Loire style. It's got like really good acidity. They're very clean in Virginia. There's like a really wonderful ripeness to them. I would recommend Viognier. And then the other one that I would recommend that we did mention is Tannat. A lot of people have not had Tannat. There's not nearly as much of it in Virginia as Cabernet Franc, but it won't be hard to find. And it's the ink dark high tannin, bold, very ageable, high acidity. It's really a unique red wine, and they're very structured and interesting.
When people come into the tasting room and tell me that they drink mostly California Cab, which is not the style of wine that we will ever really make in Virginia, right? Like it's not like our wines are so much more European in style because of our climate. But if that's someone's favorite wine, a California Cab, generally Tannat is where I send them because it is kind of our most structured, our darkest red.
Cool. I love the variety. It's insane. Yeah, like you said, there's a little bit of everything kind of going on in Virginia. And I would honestly like those were kind of towards the top of my list too. My first Virginia wine was a Cabernet Franc, and I loved it. I actually found it at a Total Wine here in Washington. It was the only Virginia wine, and it was kind of an older vintage. I think they must have just been like very bottom of the box of like wines. It was like a Horton something, I think was the winery.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that was the first one. I think that's how I ended up getting into the Virginia wine. But then, yeah, I've been seeking out Cabernet Francs are amazing. The Viogniers are great. I don't think I've had a Tenet. Is that where? How am I saying that right? I haven't heard of that one as much. But I'll have to give that one a try. Very cool. Okay,
You don't have to remember the vintage of the Horton, do you?
Oh gosh, no, I don't think so. I want to say like 2017. Maybe because the thing is too, I bought like 3 of them. Well, I bought one and then I went back and bought 3 more, and one of them was no good, unfortunately. And of course, that was when I like shared with friends. I'm like, guys, I swear to God, this wine is amazing. This is like not the other one's worth so much better.
That's the
But yeah, I know it's one of those where like, yeah, and I don't know where they were storing it, or how great it was. But like I said, like it was like it showcased. It was like Thanksgiving in a bottle. It was so good. Awesome. Were you asking, did you work at all with Horton or?
I did. I worked there for 3 years.
Oh, that's so cool.
But I was there before then. That was where I started.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I'll double check on that. I'll check back in with you once I have a picture of the bottle somewhere.
If they had bottles there without it, I'd be scared.
It would be a little worrisome.
Fair enough. Yeah, that was
like 20 years ago. So
fair enough. So I want to talk a little bit more about, on your website, there's something called the Winemaker Studio. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and why you created it?
Yeah. So when we started Walsh Family Wine, we didn't have a winery. We had a vineyard. So we needed to, rent space or use space at other wineries. And we went to a winery, we would make wine there for a year, and then we would want to increase our production. And that sounds like we were making a lot of wine, but this means we want to go from 2 barrels to 4 barrels.
Right.
And then 4 barrels to 6 barrels. But we kept having to switch wineries because there was not really a facility in our area that was equipped or really had like a business model to have other people come in and make wine. Not to mention like a winemaker that is going to be probably kind of annoying about how it's going to be done or wanting to do it myself. So we kept moving around. And when we finally got kind of the business going to a point of where we were going to have our own facility, we thought, well, we should be a facility where other people can come, because it would have been so wonderful if there would have been somebody that would have kind of helped us in this way.
It's a see a need, fill a need.
Yeah. So we could be this facility. And it's not so much it's not really like a business decision. It's more of like, or at least for me, I was like, well, if we do that and we can find like these really interesting producers, it's going to be their passion projects. So it's going to be good vineyards and interesting wines and sort of forward thinking approaches. It would just be good to be surrounded by those people, because I get older every year, and a little more out of touch.
I do not. No.
So it's a way to be surrounded by these interesting projects. So that's what we do. So it's called the Winemaker Studio. Generally it's other winemakers who are starting their own projects or have kind of a side project. And we allow them and have kind of resources for them to make the wine, bottle the wine, and then sell the wine.
Wow. All around. That's amazing.
Yeah. We kind of are help. And then when they, hopefully they get to a size of where, like us, they they move on to the next
They
step.
leave the nest.
They leave the
Aw.
nest. So that's kind of what it was. And then we also will invite, we invite them, and then we invite small producers or kind of boutique-y, teeny producers from around the state to our tasting room to do what we call a takeover, a bar takeover. There's actually one starting in 50 minutes.
Oh, very cool.
Where we don't have to be there, where they come and pour their wines to our client, to our guests. And so it's it's an opportunity for them to get in front of people. And then it's also an opportunity for our customers to be exposed to these really interesting projects. So those are kind of the similar things, but that was the idea behind it. And we have some great winemaker studio projects. And this year is very exciting because we just finished harvest a few weeks ago, but we have some really interesting ones that are coming out of 2023. And we hope to see it, continue to grow. But it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, I think both of those two things, the winemaker studio and the bar takeovers, came from a place of things that we would have really loved to have had when we started the Walsh label. And I think Nate did a really good job talking about the winemaker studio side of that. But I always joke that making the wine is the easy part and selling the wine is the hard part.
That is
so
fair.
After we started putting Walsh wine, in a bottle and getting it out on the market. And at that time, we did not have a tasting room. We did not have any way to sell it other than, e-commerce or restaurants and wine shops, which we had great support from the local restaurants and wine shops. But even when you put your wines there, it's hard to make sure that people are telling your story and they understand, why this bottle is $29 as opposed to the New Zealand $12 Sauvignon
Right.
Blanc. So what we were looking to find was a place where we could tell our story and tell our philosophy and taste out the wines to the end consumer. And that's kind of what ended up being the bar takeover idea. So people who may not have a tasting room or may not have a following up here in Northern Virginia, a lot of the people who come are from Charlottesville or from Southern Virginia, and it's just a new audience for them. And it's been important for us, very much a rising tide lifts all ships, that these are the stories and the producers that we think are interesting and we really want them to succeed. So if we can help with that in any way, we're really excited too.
Oh, I think it's absolutely amazing. I think it's proof that wine people are really amazing people. I think that's one thing about once I got into this industry, and one of those examples too of with the podcast, there's so many people that I'm just starting this podcast, it's just me in my, office in my house, starting a podcast, and so many people that immediately when I reach out, they're like, yeah, we'd love to talk and do this. And the fact that, once you found your place and we're able to do this, you're opening the doors to, let other people in. I think, you look at other industries and they'd be like, what? You're selling other people's wines at your place. Don't you want to sell, and you're like, but no, it helps everybody grow. And it helps, because starting in the wine world, yeah, like you guys said, you're like, we could only make one wine because it was so hard to move on from there, and giving that opportunity to others is really cool. Now you're doing a lot of stuff already, but I'm curious, and this is the last question before we get to the little kind of mini speed round I do, but is there anything new and exciting that you're working on that you want to share about?
So
is there?
Yeah. So actually we just released a wine that I started working on in 2016. So
right.
sort of related to the question about the varietals that do well. So we have these, really fairly well suited white vinifera varietals, Viognier, Petit Manseng. We didn't talk about it, but Albarino does pretty well, Chardonnay, and
some Shannon.
And I always thought, as we would make these varietal wines, that the best wine here is a blend of these, because Viognier, for example, super aromatic, very kind of can be almost oily, very full-bodied for a white, but very low acidity. The risk with Viognier is it can be a little flabby, and doesn't have like a lot of refreshing qualities. But Petit Manseng has this raging, it has like almost Riesling-like acidity sometimes, and is like a little more angular and can kind of help structure Viognier a little bit better. And Albarino for us, which is very unlike really Albarino from anywhere else. Virginia Albarino is very exotic and floral, and like it's a bolder white wine compared to like what's grown around the Mediterranean. It's beautiful. These all have these complementary characteristics. So when we were looking at expanding one of our vineyards, the Bethany Ridge vineyard, and there was a block that was, we really liked it for white grapes, and we were trying to figure out what would do well there. And what we ended up planting for was a white blend, a vineyard designate white blend. It's very common in vineyards for reds, but it's not as common for whites to do the white blend. So that was planted. We planted it in 2017, and we released the first white blend from there, which is called Paonia from Bethany Ridge Vineyard.
It's so good.
It's the 2021 blend, like 2 weeks ago.
It's funny because if she had asked, and you did ask about what's new, that wine has like been on my radar or like part of our conversations for so long. I forget that no one's had it except for like in the last 2 weeks.
And we kind of, for our vineyard and our winemaking and kind of our preference, we were looking to like a lot of white Rhone blends, so like Chateauneuf de Pape Blanc. Mm-hmm. Honestly, some white blends from the West Coast.
The Badenhorst white.
Yeah, a little bit from style, like these really, really textural, really like secondary flavor focused whites that are not oak based at all. It's all ripeness and sort of the sort of sappy quality of these ripe grapes. So that's very exciting for us.
It's not sweet.
No.
A lot of the words that they.
Oh yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah. I think a lot of people do associate, but yeah, you can have all of that without any sweetness. Absolutely.
So that's very exciting for us.
Yeah, well, I definitely know what I'm going to be putting in my order after we get done with this call, because that sounds wonderful.
There will be a red, like a red counterpart to that, but it's still a year or two from being released.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. It also like it says, it also showcases, like you said, it's like how long these things take. You're like, yeah, I guess that is new to everybody who's listening or like, watching. You're like, we've been working on it for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wild. Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, super fun. I love that. I think that's a good one. Is that one available online as well?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Good.
Yes.
If not, I will be following up.
Yeah. We didn't make a lot of it, so I don't know.
It is. It's available. If it seems like you can't get it, email us, but it is available.
Got it. That was kind of a selfish question. I just needed to know.
Gotta talk to the people who know people.
Yeah. I like it. Okay. I always finish these with a little, I call it a speed round because it's more just like, don't think about the question too hard. Otherwise we'll be here all day. They're just meant to be like the first thing that kind of comes to mind to get an idea of people in the wine world. What are you thinking of? So first question is like favorite wine at the moment.
Don't think about it.
The white wine that we drank last night was a white Chateauneuf de Pape from Clos Saint-Jean, and it was delicious.
That sounds lovely.
That's the one top. Is that what you're going to say?
I have the same answer. We had our production team over for dinner last night, and so we pulled out the fancy stuff. That's my answer.
It's a great answer. I honestly think I like white Chateauneuf de Pape more than red. It's so like you said, it's just like that texture and all the flavor. So good. Okay. Favorite wine region that you've ever visited?
South Africa. Immediately. Yeah. I mean, any of them they're within. So it could be Stellenbosch or Swartland, or it is, I think, the most beautiful place in the world. It's so stunningly beautiful. And I also love Chenin. So there's just so much good Chenin there. I think that what's happening there is really exciting.
Oh, cool.
I'm going to go Central Otago. So
okay.
In South Island of New Zealand.
Very fun. Okay, very fun places. I'm like adding all these to my bucket list. What about a wine region you'd like to visit that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Central Otago.
I've never been to the Loire. Or no, I'm sorry, I've never been to the Rhone.
Yes, you have.
The Rhone. Condrieu is where I would go.
Classical for me. Okay, that's a good answer.
Yes. Okay. How about favorite wine and food pairing?
Mine is Riesling and Thai food.
I knew you were going to say that.
What style of Riesling? Do you go dry, off dry, sweet?
Depends on the Thai food, but let's say
Nate, don't let Nate fool you. He is not a spicy Thai
let's say
eater.
it's 2 peppers spicy, then I'll take a spatlese.
There you go. Hey, you're better than me. I got 0 stars over here. I grew up in the Midwest. The most spice I can handle is garlic. So
my favorite wine and food pairing is champagne and fried chicken.
great answer. Delicious. It's both sound lovely.
I could just end it as champagne. Honestly.
Champagne and whatever.
It would be a bottle of Laurent Perrier, the Grand Siècle, which is their top wine and is one of my favorite wines in the world.
We're really making it seem like we drink fancy all the time.
Hey, I asked for favorite, that's okay.
You gotta go to the top with some fried chicken.
Yeah.
Because I'm from Georgia. I love fried chicken.
Yes, it's the best pairing. I remember I did a champagne pairing I did a champagne tasting at this wine shop, and somebody that is a regular to the wine shop also brought a bucket of fried chicken and was like, "Everybody, trust me, this is a good idea." And it was great.
If you want to drink a lot of wine, you really need some sustenance. And whenever champagne and oysters, sure, but you're gonna get drunk,
right?
If you do champagne and fried chicken, you can last so much longer.
I like it. All right. And last question, for those that, are interested in learning more about wine, but they kind of are on a budget. Do you have any recommendations for your best bottle of wine, or the wine that you would get if you had only $15 to spend?
Not to keep going back to this answer, but South African wines are such good value. They just come in at such a really outstanding price. And then if I can have 2 answers.
Oh, absolutely. Go for it.
South American. I am a huge proponent of the wines from Argentina and Chile. And in my opinion, some of the best values in the wine world. There's just such a great economy of scale for winemaking there. And yeah.
Good answers. Nate?
My answer would be Germany.
Oh, yeah. We were talking about this too.
Don't be afraid of a little sweetness and just go visit Germany with those $15 and you can get a great deal. If you just want to find some really delicious old Riesling, they're a dime a dozen on websites like winebids.com because no one buys them. Don't tell them that.
I know. Don't tell people. It's our secret.
A little secret. No, I agree. Well, yeah, because people they stay away from Riesling. They're afraid of, they have one idea of it in their heads. And, Riesling is really beautiful. And like you said, aged ones too, because they age so well, so many wineries could make such great versions that would last. And yeah, good answer. I never thought about Germany, but absolutely.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
But we drink, this makes it sound like we drink everything. I love Washington State wines. I love Oregon. I love California. There's really great wine all over the world these days. So,
oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for me, it's the under 15. I have certain places that I'll reach to, or the thing of if I'm traveling home, and I'm going back to Wisconsin and what, the options are the liquor store or the grocery store and what will I grab there versus if you ask me to just pick somewhere for favorite, I'd be that's nearly impossible because everywhere has great winemakers that know what they're doing and do amazing things with that. But well, that's everything that I have. Thank you for joining me and giving us this little education on Virginia wine. And just as a little shout out again, make sure people know if they want to try your wine, you guys do ship to most places in the US and they can get that all on your website, right?
Correct.
Walsh Family Wine singular.com.
Perfect. All right. And I'll add it in the show notes as well so people can find it. But thanks again, guys, and enjoy your bar takeover after this.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks for taking the time.
Yes, thank you. Have a good one, guys. I hope this has convinced you to not sleep on Virginia wine. They are really coming into their own in this region, and especially with more incredible wine people like Sarah and Nate moving to the area, it is a place to watch. Oh, and did you hear that Charlottesville, Virginia was named Wine Region of the Year by Wine Enthusiasts? So it's not just me saying this stuff. If you loved this episode as much as I did, I would so appreciate it. And I know I say this every time, but it really does mean something to me. If you could take a quick second, rate it, leave a review. If you know a wine lover in your life, share this podcast with them. And as always, you can take a screenshot of the podcast, share it to your social media to let people know what they should listen to. In next week's episode, I'll be talking about wine flaws, where they come from, and also give you tips on how to determine if you simply don't like the wine or if there's something funky going on there and what you should do if that happens. Thanks again for listening, and as a thank you, I'd like to share my free shopping guide, 15 Wines Under $15. Simply head to my website, corkandfizz.com, scroll to the bottom, and join my mailing list. Cheers!